The night was quiet, almost too quiet for November. In the small, sleepy town of Amityville, Long Island, the air carried that kind of heavy stillness that comes before a storm. It was 3 a.m., the hour when most people dream, and when nightmares like to crawl into the world of the living. Inside 112 Ocean Avenue, the DeFeo family was asleep. The house itself was beautiful, a large, Dutch Colonial home with white wood panels and tall windows shaped like eyes, watching the street below. Behind it, a canal glistened faintly under the moonlight. It was the kind of house you'd point at and say, "That's where a happy family must live." But appearances lie. That night, something darker was breathing inside those walls. The DeFeos were 6 people. Ronald Sr., the strict, proud father known for his temper. Louise, his soft-spoken wife who always tried to keep peace. And their 5 children: Dawn, 18, Allison, 13, Mark, 12, John, 9, and Ronald Jr., known to everyone as Butch. Butch was 23 years old, tall, restless, and angry. He'd been struggling with his father for years, fights, shouting, punches. Neighbors heard the arguments almost every week. And lately, people said Butch had started talking about hearing voices. Voices that told him his family was plotting against him. Voices that whispered to him late at night. That night, those whispers became something else. At 3:15 a.m., Butch rose from his bed. The floor creaked under his feet as he walked across the room. He opened the closet and pulled out his .35 caliber Marlin rifle. The metal felt cold against his skin. He moved through the hallway, barefoot, silent, focused. His parents' bedroom door was half open. He could see the outline of his father sleeping on the left side of the bed. His mother lay beside him, breathing slow and steady. Butch raised the rifle. 2 thunderous shots broke the silence. The walls shook. Birds outside scattered into the night. He reloaded, turned, and walked calmly down the hall. Next, Mark and John's room. The 2 boys lay still, their faces buried in pillows. 2 more gunshots. 2 more lives gone. Then came Allison's room. She was only 13. Her eyes opened just as he entered. There was confusion, maybe a question forming on her lips. Butch didn't let her finish it. 1 shot. Finally, he walked into Dawn's room, his oldest sister, the one who had always tried to defend him when their father yelled. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled the trigger. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, sharp, metallic, choking. Every member of the DeFeo family was dead. And what haunts people to this day is how none of them seemed to move. Every single body was found lying face down, as if they had never even woken up. No one screamed, no one ran, no neighbors heard a thing. 6 gunshots and silence. How? At dawn, Butch showered, changed his clothes, and went to work at his father's car dealership, pretending nothing had happened. Around noon, he complained that he couldn't reach his family. That night, he ran into a bar, shouting, "You gotta help me. I think my parents have been shot." The police arrived quickly. When they entered the house, they found the bodies, one by one, in their beds. Blood soaked through the mattresses. The air was heavy, thick with death. Detective Joseph Napolitano, the first on scene, later said, "It was the quietest murder scene I've ever been in. You could almost hear the blood drying." They brought Butch in for questioning. At first, he blamed a mob hitman. But when his story began to fall apart, he finally confessed. "Once I started," he said, "I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." For more than a year, 112 Ocean Avenue sat empty. A for sale sign stood in front, but no one wanted it. Children in the neighborhood would cross the street rather than walk past it. Neighbors said they could still see lights flicker at night, even though there was no electricity. Sometimes, they heard what sounded like footsteps in the upper windows. Inside, the house grew cold, as if the warmth had been drained from its walls. The smell of gunpowder lingered long after the police had gone. The carpets had been cleaned, the walls repainted, but something stayed. Something that would soon awaken again. On December 18, 1975, A young couple stood at the edge of the driveway, staring up at the house. George and Kathy Lutz, newly married, full of hope, with 3 young children and a dog named Harry. It was the house of their dreams, spacious, near the water, and sold for an unbelievable price, $80,000. They knew what had happened inside. The realtor told them everything, but they didn't believe in ghosts. George laughed it off. "Houses don't kill people," he said. "People kill people." If only he knew. Before moving in, Kathy, a devout Catholic, asked a priest to bless the house. Father Ralph Pecoraro arrived one afternoon carrying his Bible and a small flask of holy water. He walked through the rooms, murmuring prayers. When he reached the upstairs bedroom, the one where the DeFeo boys had died, the air turned icy. He felt a sudden, sharp pain in his hand, as if something invisible had slapped him. Then, a deep, male voice whispered behind him, "Get out." The priest froze. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He turned slowly. No one was there, just the empty room. But the voice had been real. It had weight, as if spoken inches from his ear. He left immediately. Later, he called Kathy and told her to never use that room as a bedroom. She promised, but it was already too late. Something had noticed them. That evening, the Lutz family moved in. The sun set early. By midnight, a heavy fog rolled in from the canal, blanketing the street. Inside, the fireplace crackled softly. Everything seemed fine. But at 3:15 a.m., George Lutz woke up. The house was silent, too silent. He could hear the faint ticking of a wall clock downstairs. And then, a bang, like a door slamming. He sat up, heart pounding. He got out of bed, walked down the stairs, and saw that the front door was wide open, swinging in the wind. He was sure he'd locked it. He checked the bolts. They were undamaged. As he stood there, his dog Harry began growling, low and deep, staring at something in the corner of the living room. George turned his head slowly. Nothing there, just shadows. But the air was freezing cold, his breath visible in front of his face. He shut the door, locked it, and went back upstairs. But he couldn't sleep. When he looked at the clock again, it was still 3:15 a.m. The minute hand hadn't moved. They moved into a house where 6 people had died. But the house wasn't done yet. The morning after they moved in, the air inside the house felt heavy. Not cold, not warm, just thick, like the walls themselves were breathing. George tried to shake it off. He blamed it on exhaustion, the stress of moving, the cold December weather. But the sounds started that same day. Footsteps upstairs. Heavy, deliberate pacing steps. But every time George ran up to check, nothing. The rooms were empty. Later that night, as they unpacked boxes, Kathy noticed something strange. The front door, the one George had locked the night before, was open again. No footprints, no broken locks, just open. George shut it, double-checked it, and muttered under his breath, "Maybe the house is settling." But deep down, something inside him whispered, "It's not the house." By the 3rd day, the temperature in the house started to fluctuate violently. Some rooms were freezing cold, so cold you could see your breath, while others were burning hot, even with the heat turned off. In the living room, near the big windows facing the canal, a sudden draft of icy wind passed through. Kathy wrapped herself in a blanket and looked around for an open window. There was none. All the windows were sealed tight. George, now constantly shivering, began spending hours by the fireplace, feeding it logs until the air turned smoky. But no matter how much fire he made, he never felt warm. Kathy noticed something worse. George was changing. He'd stopped shaving. He rarely ate. He would stare into the fire for hours, mumbling about the smell of death in the walls. At night, he woke up at 3:15 a.m. every night without fail, always at the same minute. And every night, he'd find the front door open again. It began in the sewing room, the same room where the DeFeo boys had been murdered. Kathy walked in one morning and screamed. Hundreds of flies covered the window panes, thick black clusters, crawling and buzzing in the cold winter air. It was December in Long Island. There should have been no flies. George came upstairs, swatted at them, killed dozens. They cleaned the room completely, sealed the window, and left. An hour later, when Kathy returned, the flies were back. Alive, buzzing, covering the cross on the wall. That night, Kathy dreamed of two young boys lying face down on a bed. Their skin pale, their eyes open. When she woke up, she could still hear the buzzing. Father Pecoraro, the priest who had blessed the house, tried to call them several times. Each time, the phone filled with static. He could barely hear their voices. And every time he said the words, "that room," the line would scream with high-pitched noise and disconnect. That same night, he became violently ill. His hands blistered as if burned. He told another priest that something evil was inside that house, and that it didn't want him to come back. It was around 2:30 in the morning when Kathy woke up to the sound of her daughter, Missy, talking to someone. She walked quietly down the hallway to Missy's room. Her daughter was sitting near the window, whispering softly. Kathy smiled. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" Missy pointed toward the window and said, "Jody." Kathy looked out. There was nothing, just the dark yard and the reflection of her own face on the glass. But as she leaned closer, her heart nearly stopped. Behind her reflection, glowing faintly in the glass, were two red eyes, large, round, staring directly back at her. She screamed and pulled Missy away. When George came running, there was nothing there. The yard was empty, but when he went outside the next morning, he saw hoofprints in the snow. Pig-like, but far too large to belong to any animal in the area. The noises grew louder. Whispers, laughter, the sound of furniture sliding across the floor at night. Once, when Kathy was alone in the kitchen, she heard a low male voice whisper, "Kathy." She froze. Her hands trembled. The voice came again, this time from right behind her. "Kathy." She turned. No one was there, but the smell that followed, thick, rotting sulfur, made her gag. George began to hear things too. He heard music playing in the living room, even when the radio was unplugged. Sometimes, he'd hear footsteps in the attic, slow, dragging, like someone pulling chains. Every night at 3:15 he woke up, and each time, something called him toward the boathouse near the canal. He'd step outside, barefoot, barely aware of what he was doing, and every time he swore he saw someone or something staring back at him from the water. It was snowing hard that night. The whole house groaned under the wind. The children were asleep. Kathy lay in bed beside George, finally drifting into uneasy dreams. Then, suddenly, the bedroom door creaked open by itself. George's eyes snapped open. He could see the dark outline of the hallway beyond the door, and something standing there. A figure, tall, black, motionless. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but George could feel its gaze, cold and hateful. He tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't move. He was frozen. He could only watch as the figure slowly turned its head, revealing a pale, twisted face. Then, in a blink, it was gone. He sat up gasping, drenched in sweat. The door was closed again. But the next morning, he found hoof-shaped marks burned into the wooden floor near the doorway. By now, the house wasn't just haunted, George would later say. It was alive. It watched us. It wanted us to stay or to die trying. That night, George couldn't sleep again. The wind outside howled like a living thing, scraping branches against the windows. He sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. It made small, wet cracking sounds like wood splitting under pressure. Kathy lay beside him, restless, murmuring in her sleep. At exactly 3:15 a.m., George's eyes opened. He didn't hear anything, but something pulled him. Not a noise, not a voice, just a feeling. His body moved before his mind did. He found himself walking down the stairs, his breath visible in the cold air. The front door was wide open again. Outside, the yard glowed faintly under the snow. A faint mist drifted across the ground, and down by the boathouse, something moved. He squinted, trying to focus. For a second, he thought he saw a man standing there. Tall, shoulders hunched, face hidden. But when he blinked, the shape was gone. When he went back inside, the house smelled like sulfur. Kathy was in the kitchen, pale and shaking. She said she'd just woken up from a nightmare. She saw a shadow crawl out of the fireplace and stand beside the bed. George didn't say anything. He just stared at her, his eyes hollow. Over the next days, George stopped going to work. He stayed home, chopping wood endlessly, sweating even in the freezing cold. The sound of the axe echoed through the yard, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Kathy watched him from the window, and for a moment, she thought his face looked different, harder, older. At dinner, the children complained that the walls smelled bad again. A thick, sour stench like rotting meat. Missy said Jody didn't like the smell either. Kathy tried to ask her who Jody was, but Missy just smiled and said, "Jody says we should stay here forever." That night, the house shook. The windows rattled in their frames, and something heavy slammed upstairs, like furniture being thrown. George ran up, but every room was exactly as they'd left it. Then he saw it. A black stain spreading slowly across the ceiling, dripping down the wall. The liquid was thick and dark, almost oily. When he touched it, it was warm. The next morning, Kathy found cloven marks on the stairway, small at first, then larger near the landing. She followed them to the sewing room. The air there was colder than ice. The flies were back, hundreds of them. They covered the crucifix on the wall again. The buzzing was deafening. When she screamed, George ran in and slapped at the flies with his hands. But when they stopped moving, they weren't just flies anymore. Their bodies were crushed into tiny crosses. That night, Kathy woke up gasping. Her body was covered in sweat. She looked beside her. George wasn't in bed. She called his name, no answer. She got up and found him downstairs, kneeling in front of the fireplace, staring into the flames. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. When she touched his shoulder, he turned, and his eyes were different, wide, empty like glass. She whispered, "George." He smiled, just barely. "It told me what it wants." Before she could speak, he turned back to the fire. The flames flickered higher, twisting into shapes. Faces, mouths, screaming. Kathy ran upstairs, grabbed the children, locked their doors. The house moaned again, the floorboards bending under invisible weight. Then silence. The next morning, George didn't remember anything. He said he'd been cold and couldn't sleep. But when Kathy looked into his eyes, she saw something behind them, something watching, waiting. The family tried to pretend it was normal. They cleaned the stains, opened the windows, let sunlight in. But every time they turned away, the light seemed to fade. Even the priest wouldn't come back. The house had become a living nightmare. Each morning, the Lutz family woke to a different smell, a different shadow, a different sensation that made their skin crawl. Kathy could no longer tell if the cold drafts were from broken windows or from something else. The air felt heavy, almost viscous, and it clung to the skin like invisible fingers. George's behavior was changing. He spent hours pacing the halls, muttering to himself. Sometimes he would stop suddenly, stare at a wall, and listen, nodding as if someone was answering him. At night, he woke at exactly 3:15 a.m. every night and wandered the house barefoot, drawn toward the rooms where the DeFeo murders had taken place. The children began to cry at night. Missy would wake screaming, saying she could see a man in her room. Daniel refused to enter certain parts of the house, claiming shadows followed him, creeping along the floor. Even the dog, Harry, growled constantly, staring at empty corners and refusing to go upstairs. Kathy tried to maintain normalcy, but the house was relentless. Furniture would shift on its own. Chairs would be overturned, tables scratched deep with claw-like marks. One evening, Kathy entered the kitchen to find the walls smeared with a black, oily substance that hadn't been there moments before. When she tried to clean it, it seemed to spread faster. Flies returned in impossible numbers. Hundreds, buzzing incessantly, filling rooms where no food had been left. They clung to crucifixes, walls, and windows. Their presence was oppressive, filling the house with a deafening hum. The children would scream when they saw them, but the flies never left. George began to lose his mind. He was pale, gaunt, and distant. His eyes seemed hollow, reflecting something that Kathy couldn't name. One night, she woke to find him kneeling before the fireplace, chanting in a low, guttural voice that she didn't recognize. When she touched him, he flinched violently, whispering that the house had told him it wanted to take control. Objects moved on their own. Doors slammed. Lights flickered. In the attic, something dragged across the floor. Heavy, deliberate footsteps followed them through the halls at night. The family could hear whispers in every room, murmuring their names, promising harm, making threats in voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The most terrifying night came when Kathy was awoken by a strange smell, rotten meat mixed with decay, and the sound of someone breathing heavily outside her bedroom door. She peered out and saw nothing, but the shadow in the hallway seemed to stretch unnaturally, moving even though no one approached. The children slept, seemingly unaware, but when they woke, they recounted visions of faces pressed against the windows, eyes glowing in the darkness, and a feeling that someone or something was standing just behind them. Kathy and George attempted to seek help from Father Pecoraro, but the priest could barely communicate with them over the phone. Each time he tried, the line was filled with static, and a deep, unearthly voice would whisper threats before disconnecting. The priest warned them not to try to confront whatever lived in the house, saying it was stronger than any human could hope to be. By the second week, the children were terrorized nightly. Shadows moved across walls even when lights were on. Cold spots appeared suddenly, freezing the family in place. Doors opened and closed on their own. One evening, George woke to find the front door wide open, despite locking it himself. Outside, the snow was undisturbed, except for deep, cloven hoof-like marks leading up to the porch. The house seemed alive. It breathed, it watched, it waited, and it was relentless. By the 28th day, George and Kathy could endure no more. They packed their children and fled the house in the dead of night, leaving everything behind. They had experienced enough terror to last a lifetime. And yet, the house at 112 Ocean Avenue would go on to become legendary. A place where death had left its stain and something darker, something unseen, remained. Even today, the house stands, sold and resold, but stories of strange occurrences continue to emerge. Lights flicker, shadows appear, and visitors speak of cold spots, unsettling feelings, and the occasional sighting of eyes glowing in the darkness. The Amityville Horror wasn't just a story of a haunted house. It was a warning. Some places never forget, and some evil never truly leaves. After fleeing the house, the Lutz family didn't find immediate relief. The horrors they had endured seemed to follow them, lingering in their minds, haunting every shadow and whisper in the night. Even miles away, Kathy would wake in the middle of the night, convinced she could smell the same thick, rotting stench, the one that had clung to the walls of 112 Ocean Avenue. George became increasingly obsessed with explaining what had happened. He spoke of the house as if it were alive, intelligent, and malevolent. He claimed it communicated with him through objects moving, doors opening, and cold spots that moved through the rooms like invisible currents. He told reporters and priests that it was as if some unseen force had entered his mind, whispering, guiding, controlling him for those 28 days. The children, though young, recalled vivid experiences, shadows stretching across walls, glowing eyes in the dark, doors that opened and slammed shut on their own. Missy often insisted she could hear the name Jody, though none of them had met anyone by that name. They described the flies returning, the black, oily substance on the walls, and the weight of something pressing down on them while they slept. News of the Lutz family's experiences spread quickly. Reporters, paranormal investigators, and curious neighbors all flocked to Amityville to hear the stories. Many were skeptical, accusing the family of fabricating tales for publicity. Others, however, claimed they had witnessed odd occurrences themselves. Lights flickering, strange sounds emanating from the house, and an overwhelming sense of unease that could not be explained. Eventually, the family collaborated with Jay Anson, a writer who would later publish the Amityville Horror book in 1977. Through his writing, the story reached a worldwide audience, capturing imaginations and terrifying readers everywhere. Anson meticulously documented the events, interviews, and reports, creating a narrative that was both horrifying and compelling. Despite public fascination, controversy remained. Skeptics argued that the phenomena were exaggerated or entirely fabricated. Investigators questioned inconsistencies in the family's accounts, claiming that many events could have been the product of stress, fear, or opportunism. Yet, for George, Kathy, and the children, the experience had been undeniably real. They had fled a house that seemed alive, a house that held the power to terrify, control, and haunt the living. The house itself, though sold to new owners, never escaped its dark legacy. Stories of strange noises, sudden temperature changes, and fleeting shadows persisted. People who entered reported feelings of unease, as if something unseen was watching. Even decades later, 112 Ocean Avenue remained a symbol of terror, a reminder that some places, stained by violence and darkness, retain an evil that lingers long after the original horrors have ended. For the Lutz family, the experience was life-altering. The psychological impact lasted years. Nightmares, fear of certain rooms, and the haunting sense that some force had touched them personally persisted. Their story became part of American folklore, a blend of true crime, the supernatural, and the enduring question: what really happened at 112 Ocean Avenue? The Amityville Horror stands as one of the most infamous cases of alleged hauntings in history. It's a story of tragedy, fear, and the unknown, where a brutal murder set the stage for terror that would grip an entire family, capturing imaginations and leaving questions that may never be answered. Even today, when people walk past that canal-side house in Amityville, they can feel it, the oppressive weight of its history, the echoes of screams long past, and the unsettling awareness that some darkness never truly leaves a place, or the people who lived through it. Even after the Lutz family left 112 Ocean Avenue, the story didn't end. Police files, newspaper articles, and witness statements kept the house in the public eye. Neighbors reported strange occurrences long after the family's departure. Lights flickering in empty rooms, doors opening and closing on their own, and an inexplicable sense of dread that filled anyone who stepped inside. The house was thoroughly investigated. Paranormal researchers visited, equipment in hand, but each report only added more mystery. Thermometers recorded sudden cold spots. Cameras captured unexplainable flashes of light. Some claimed to hear whispers or distant screams, voices that seemed to call out names, beckoning those inside to look deeper, to see what should not be seen. Journalists descended upon Amityville. The Lutz family story became national news. Critics were quick to challenge the authenticity, calling it a hoax, a marketing stunt to sell books and films. Others defended the family, citing sworn statements and first-hand accounts that were hard to dismiss. Interviews with George and Kathy revealed a lingering terror, a psychological weight that neither time nor distance could fully erase. The children, years later, would describe vivid nightmares, shadows in their peripheral vision, and an instinctive fear of places where they felt watched. Missy's belief in Jody remained unshakable. Even as she grew older, a constant reminder of the unseen presence she had felt so strongly in that house. Media coverage only amplified the legend. Jay Anson's book, The Amityville Horror, became a bestseller. Movies followed, adapting the story with creative liberties, but the core horror, the brutal murders and the alleged hauntings, captured the imagination of millions. Each retelling added layers, some exaggerated, some dramatized, but the spine-chilling sense that the house itself was alive remained. Investigators and skeptics continued to examine the case. Some pointed to stress, hysteria, or fabrication. Others noted that the house had a history of tragedy long before the DeFeos moved in, lending credence to the idea that certain energies linger, imprinting memories of violence and despair into the walls. No one could fully explain the smell of decay, the cold spots, the shifting shadows, or the black slime that appeared inexplicably on walls and furniture. For the Lutz family, the experience was transformative. George spoke of a personal battle, claiming he had felt himself almost possessed, as though the house had sought control over his mind and body. Kathy described a constant, gnawing fear that had followed them even after leaving. The children, innocent witnesses, carried fragments of horror into their adult lives, a reminder that some encounters leave scars far deeper than any physical wound. Even today, the house at 112 Ocean Avenue draws visitors. Paranormal enthusiasts, curious tourists, and skeptics alike step onto the property, some reporting eerie feelings, sudden chills, or glimpses of shadowy figures in the windows. The legend has endured for decades, a symbol of unexplained terror and the fragility of human perception when faced with the unknown. The Amityville Horror is not just a story of a haunted house. It is a cautionary tale. It is a tale of tragedy, of violence, and of the unseen forces that may linger where human suffering has occurred. It reminds us that some places never forget, that some evil never truly leaves, and that the line between reality and terror can sometimes be thinner than we dare imagine. And for those who walk past the house today, the weight of history is palpable. The eyes of 112 Ocean Avenue seem to follow. The shadows stretch just a little too long, and in the stillness, one can almost hear the faint, distant whisper of names long gone, calling, waiting, watching. For George, Kathy, and the children, the house remains a memory they cannot erase. For the world, it remains a story that will never die. A story of darkness, fear, and the chilling realization that some horrors are real and some houses are never empty. The Amityville Horror ended for the family when they escaped, but for anyone who enters, who dares to cross the threshold of 112 Ocean Avenue, the house speaks. And it remembers.